Today, lacrosse is achieving new heights, with record crowds watching major indoor lacrosse league games in the eastern United States, and in Canada supporting local senior and junior leagues. Lacrosse, our country's national summer sport, is seeing its resurgence, its renaissance. Quite fitting for a game that is recognized as the oldest organized sport in North America. It is from this beginning that it draws its spirit and its emotion. A sport that is rich in cultural and religious background, lacrosse is much more than a game, it is a way of life. The Indians called it Begataway, the little brother of war.
The Great Spirit made our stick game for profound and sacred reasons. Long before the black-robed missionaries came, to strengthen pride and kinship, to mark the change of seasons, to provide a path for glory or for shame. We played to settle differences between our tribal nations, like the Mohawk and the Dakota and the Shawnee. This way, all out warfare wouldn't flare from confrontations, yet each side would taste defeat or victory. When the teams were in their places, with hundreds to a side, first tribe to hit their post or goal tree won. The object was a hard-stuck ball, sewn up in buckskin hide. The time clock was attended by the sun. The game was like a free-for-all. The field could stretch for miles. There were no regulations like today. The betting could be heavy, with the stakes laid out in piles. When the ball was tossed, the game was underway. When an intertribal contest was a serious affair, then the feathers and the war paint that we wore showed the game would be a bloody one. War cries would split the air. Our sticks would be like symbols of war. When the missionaries questioned me about our history, they asked me how lacrosse had first begun. I thought of the Great Spirit and the way we used to be. Then I raised my stick and pointed to the sun.
The history of lacrosse traces roots back over many centuries, from native beginnings to European curiosity and influence. The game we have today truly has evolved over the years. Lacrosse is played around the world in various forms, and if you watch global tournaments, you will find representative teams from Canada, the United States, but also from Australia, England, Germany, even Japan. In Canada, lacrosse is doing much more than just going well. Lacrosse is thriving. In the Lower Mainland, over 4,000 boys and girls aged 6 to 16 enjoy playing the sport at various levels and divisions. Across this country, especially in Ontario, the game is very alive. In a country that is crazy for hockey, this continued and growing support is a result of some unselfish individuals. Men and women who give freely of their time, enthusiastically of their effort and time for this game. They simply love lacrosse. In today's program, we will profile some of those folks who 30 years ago, in Canada's centennial year, 1967, made a difference. In that year, a small group of New Westminster residents, proud of their Salmon Valley heritage, the team name Salmon Valley being synonymous with lacrosse excellence, embarked on something quite unheard of at that time. It was decided to take a Pee Wee lacrosse team on a barnstorming journey across Ontario and Quebec. This would elevate play at that level and create a whole new organization of rules and leagues all across Canada. For 16 young lacrosse players, this would be the trip of a lifetime, a trip that would leave a lacrosse legacy.
We had them away from home for 17 days, and we barnstormed Ontario.
Just lucky to be on a team with so many good players, and there were so many good ones, and it was well coached right from the start. I remember
doing the presentations after that game, you know, with all the people. It was just the highlight of my minor career, probably.
Yes, there's still 2 or 3 of us that live in New Westminster that have kids playing minor lacrosse and minor sports in New West, and all of us are coaching our sons.
It's sort of a legacy, and we've gone a full cycle, and now they're the coaches, and their kids are playing.
in 1966, Canadian lacrosse had championships similar to today, in that the best junior team from Ontario played against the best junior team from BC. At that time, it was almost a given that the Ontario representative would come out on top. This would lead one BC lacrosse executive to ask, what are they doing that we aren't?
I had a Bantam team in Moody Blocks that I was talked into coaching, and we never did win a game. We lost games by scores like 26-0. And the kids were great, but they didn't know the fundamentals of the game, and it was at that point that I thought we should go back a little further and start a Pee Wee team.
Starting younger would lead to better development, something that had already been realized in the East. Another stumbling block here in BC was the ban on house leagues. This was a hardship for isolated areas, and again, this was something that the East was already doing. It was obvious that some changes needed to take place.
It turned out that in the East, they had two playing divisions that were younger than anything we had, younger than Pee Wees. Now, we didn't know that at the time, and we put out a call for Pee Wees, and we had a flood of kids come out, some of them quite young, and we stumbled into the idea of having younger playing divisions that we called them midgets. And then still more kids came out, 5 and 6, and we called them mites. Now, it turned out at the same time, we found out later that Ontario had playing divisions they called novice and tykes, and that was all part of it. Later on, we aligned the divisions to be called the same names, East and West.
It was about this time that the role women would play in minor lacrosse was about to expand, as it was realized that development at an early age was the way of the future.
Until Don got busy with lacrosse here in the New Westminster area, the youngest kids playing were 12, 13, 14. And we actually opened up teams that were 5 and 6-year-olds. Now, you can send a 14-year-old across town to go to Sapperton Park or something, but you can't do that with a 6-year-old. So the mothers began traveling, being the chauffeurs and coming to the games and taking the boys home, and they got hooked on the game, just like anybody does if they watch lacrosse, you get hooked on it. And pretty soon they were keeping score and keeping time and watching the penalty box and fundraising and all kinds of wonderful things that mothers are very good at. And yes, it did. It opened the gates.
Lacrosse was an important part of the community. Large crowds would turn out to watch senior Seven Bellies games, and youngsters had their lacrosse idols and would carry their sticks around town and bounce a ball against any surface that would do the trick. Lacrosse was also a sport that, once you started playing the game, you were hooked for life.
Well, I guess a lot of the guys in the neighborhood were playing it, and I think I'd played a little bit with an old broken stick, but everybody in the neighborhood played. The Harts, Gordy Campbell, Harvey Borley played, and they were always throwing a ball around down the street. Jackie Fulton played, and so one day Reg Lamb came by and I was doing the dishes, and he says, "Come on over to the lacrosse box. Dave, his son, is playing on the same team Jackie is. Come on over here and let's have a look." And so I went over and I liked it as soon as I saw it. It was just the game for me.
It has the skills of hockey with the speed of basketball. It's tailor-made for kids who like to run. I've played baseball, soccer, rugby, but love bobsled best of all, because it's like the rest rolled into one. So when spring comes on the west wind on a sunny Saturday, I'll get my stick and call on Jay and Mark, and we'll toss the ball and chase it and run, pass and play all the way to the lacrosse box in the park, where we'll bounce the ball against the wall and practice submarines. With the empty net, it'll be a cinch to score. Men strolling by would stop and smile at the old familiar scene, and remember back to spring days long before. You know, I've heard some hot debates about the box of greats. My grandpa says Ike Hildebrand was best. My dad says Cliffy Sepka. But me? I say the Gates. Too bad we couldn't stage an all-star test where the teams would both list names right from the Hall of Fame. I'd put Benny or Beyonda in the slot, and send out Whitey Severson to score and save the game, and cheer Jack Barkley's flashy backhand shot, and Blackie Black or Browning take the ball right down the floor, Goss and Powless move into position, and the crowd would roar for Peter Black and Paul Parnell to score. Yep, they really were box lacrosse magicians.
How old were you when you first started playing lacrosse?
I was 9 years old. Just came out from the prairies the year before and started first summer I was out here.
Why lacrosse?
I think basically it was an exciting game. There was running involved, and a lot of my friends were playing.
I think that it was a team game, and you met other guys and had stuff in common. You could throw the ball around and stuff like that and have some fun.
30 years later, Jim Pelzer is still involved in lacrosse, both as a player and as a coach. Today, it's his kids who are playing Pee Wee lacrosse. Mark Benson is involved as a referee, looking after all the referees for the New Westminster Minor Lacrosse. Lacrosse will never leave their lives. And why should it? The game will always bring back memories of their youth, when they were on a team that went undefeated for 3 years, 96 games. A team that would be the first minor lacrosse team in history to travel east to Ontario and Quebec to challenge all rivals.
In the winter of '65, the Canadian Lacrosse Association meeting was held in Montreal. I was the vice president, or I think secretary at the time. And the French delegation from Quebec, the Quebec Lacrosse Association, came up with the idea. Actually, they said they'd heard about this team. The team had been named Team of the Year out here by now, and they had gone, I think, something like 50 games without a loss at that point. And they'd heard about this, and they said, why don't you come out here in Centennial Year? Why don't you come out to our expo, and we'll show you how to play lacrosse. We have some peewees out here. The kids will be the age they can travel for half price, 11 and 12, and that's how the idea originated. It wasn't long before I realized that that it was an opportunity to, like an exploration, it would be an opportunity to travel around and see what they were doing back there and maybe bring back some ideas. The Ontario Lacrosse Association and the Ontario Minor Lacrosse Association soon caught the spirit of what Quebec was suggesting, and they joined in, and they said, well, while you're out here, why don't you come down to Oshawa? Why don't you come to Peterborough? Why don't you come down to Toronto? How about Cornwall? And they started competing amongst themselves for who was going to host us.
The thought of their 12-year-old sons off on their own 4,000 kilometers away would have certainly alarmed some of the parents. But the enthusiasm and the idea of such a historical journey soon took over, and all of the parents caught the spirit of the trip. Of course, it helped that Evelyn and Marion Hughes would be going along as team mothers.
They told us these children were too young. They were 12, 11 and 12, and they said, oh, that's far too young. But when they found out that two women, Marion Hughes and I, were going, the parents sort of relaxed a little bit. And we did very careful planning. We had health records and their BC medical cards, and we had permission slips, and we knew which kids might wet the bed and which kids had allergies, and you know, the whole bit. And this is the kind of thing that that women do. You know, the coaches had other things to worry about, and we looked after the kids' health and welfare, so to speak.
I thought we were crazy to go. That was impossible. But we worked it out, and I looked up something the other day, and it cost us $4,000 to go.
Take how many boys?
16 boys and 17, one more later, and 5 adults altogether. And their tickets, I have the tickets for the boys were $98 return to Toronto. And
all the adults, I understand, everybody, they paid their own?
We paid our own, and the boys raised money to be part of their thing. And then they each could have up to $35 in spending money if they wanted to.
Now, you were the banker.
I kept the money.
Tell us about that.
I doled it out to them when they wanted it, and I had a book, and I checked it all out. And told them about if not to go running and buying candy all the time, that if their billets, what their billets would do and things. And people.
The trip would include visits to Upper Canada Village and Maple Leaf Gardens, and showcasing the Pee Wee Salmon Belly's talents at Expo 67. For the organizers, it would be incredibly exciting and demanding, while for the boys, well, it's doubtful they could have expected just what an incredible adventure lay before them.
What are your first thoughts about the idea of going across Canada?
Probably pretty scared and excited. Most of us probably hadn't been on airplanes before, so we were all looking forward to it.
Yeah, really excited. Like, never been back east and never actually flew that much, and to go back east and everything and all the unknown and Expo and everything was really exciting.
This team played together year-round and had been through a lot. Soccer in the winter, lacrosse in the summer, with lacrosse undefeated in the province. After beating an Alberta team from Edmonton for the right to be recognized as the best Pee Wee lacrosse team in Western Canada, a trip across Canada seemed like a logical step. With help of parents, many fundraising events, and some very thorough organizing, it all became a reality. With all the fun that this trip would bring, there was a serious side as well. It was felt it was important to unify minor lacrosse in Canada, to standardize rules, equipment, playing divisions. In the 2.5 weeks that it would take for this journey to be completed, Don Benson and Eric Hughes would have the intense opportunity to find out what they were doing right or wrong, and to talk BC lacrosse with their Ontario counterparts.
I thought of it as an exploration, an opportunity to go back there and find out firsthand how they were structured, why they were so successful, and how they managed these two younger divisions that we'd heard about. And I think we did learn that, and firsthand was the way to go.
Firsthand was soon at hand, and the team, along with its chaperones, were boarding a plane, destination Toronto. It was August 12, 1967. Canada's centennial celebration was in full swing. Expo 67 had already been recognized as a huge success, and the Pee Wee New Westminster Salmon Bellies would soon be a part of its history. But first, there would be a tournament the next morning in Cornwall. The team would travel to Ontario by plane, then be met by a bus that would take them the rest of the way to the tournament. At least, that was the plan.
We budgeted very, very carefully, and we hit a couple of curves. You know, we arrived in Toronto at midnight with 12 little boys, and there was supposed to be a bus there waiting for us to take us to Cornwall, which is like going from Vancouver to Kamloops. And nobody ever heard of us. And all the rental places, nearly all the rental places were closed. Nobody had a bus. And we ended up renting 3 cars, and we had to keep adjusting the luggage and the kids because we kept bottoming out with the cars. We had such a load. And we drove all night to get to Cornwall, and we arrived just as the dawn came up over the St. Lawrence River, and we took them in a cafe and had breakfast, and their first game was at 9 o'clock that morning, and they played and they won. So, you know, we managed.
The experience of driving across Ontario that night left Ivan Tura with one of his most vivid memories on the trip.
We landed in Toronto, and then we rented cars, and I think we went to Cornwall, and I guess there was a meteor shower that night, and I think there was 1967, and the fastbacks were the car of the day. And anyway, the rental cars that we had were 2 or 3 of them were fastbacks. I remember leaning in the back seat with a big back window looking up at the meteor showers that we were driving along in the middle of the night from Toronto towards Cornwall, Ontario.
With little sleep, the team demonstrated its abilities by winning its first 2 games and quickly put the Ontario competition on notice. But the New West team eventually lost the tournament final to the home team by 1 goal in overtime. It would be the team's first loss that year. The team would take the loss in stride. They were, after all, champions.
Well, yeah, we were pretty confident in ourselves and knew that we had a good team, and I think we went back there expecting not to lose any games.
They were an outstanding bunch of young fellows. Each of them was a good lacrosse player, a good athlete in their own right, but more than that, one fall, I think that after the first year they'd been together, they came to me and said, "We want to stay together. We'd like to, is there something we can do to stay together in sports?" Well, soccer had been one of my games in high school and so forth, and I thought that was a game I knew something about, and so we started up a soccer team and found out that it wasn't a soccer association in Westminster, so we started one up along the way. But the thing is that they played soccer and lacrosse. They stayed together all year, and that made a big difference in their attitude, and I'm sure their conditioning.
Their loss in the Cornwall tournament would be softened by their visit to Expo 67 the next day. Considered one of the finest fairs in history, the visit would include rides, shows, and pavilions. It would be an incredible experience for the 11 and 12-year-olds. Certainly a lot of fun, but Evelyn, who was a school teacher, also made sure that it was a learning experience.
We scheduled 2 full days at Expo. One of the days was Youth Day, and we were booked into the Canadian Youth Pavilion as one of the features of the day, were our boys, and they were supposed to have a competition with the Cognawaga Indian Pee-wees from near Montreal, and they didn't show, so our boys put on a demonstration for the crowd, and everywhere they went they wore their jackets and carried their sticks and talked to so many people, and they just had a wonderful time, and the educational part of this trip was unbelievable from the kids' point of view.
So here they were, far from home, at an exposition they had just arrived at, and they were part of the show. They were talented and proud to find that lacrosse was very much a part of the social fabric of our country.
Yeah, we went there a couple days and never been to any exposition that big. You know, the whole world was there and saw a lot of interesting buildings from all over the world and met a lot of people from all over the world. It was really something.
Expo 67, that was just about as active. The boys were involved with some lacrosse stick handling there, and they enjoyed that quite a bit. But I just recall several things that are somewhat humorous and yet surprising in a way. Give you an idea what happens in a place like that. When Rico went to the washroom and put his stick aside, came out, I don't think he got 20 paces away, and he realized what he went. He went raced back in, and the stick was gone. It was a real lesson to realize that you had to be on top of your situation all the time.
Well, me and one of the other fellas, Joey Morella, were too short to get on some of the rides. But Joey was a year older, so that kind of bothered him, but it didn't bother me. I thought that was good enough because I was just there.
That was a very interesting part of the trip. In addition to doing demonstrations at Expo itself, I remember very well at Upper Canada Village when they always had their lacrosse sticks with them and would play catch wherever they were going in the groups of 4. And at one point we all got together and they started up sort of an impromptu field lacrosse game. They had their bare feet, they'd been doing a lot of walking, they took off their shoes, and pretty soon a crowd started gathering. And on a much smaller scale, it reminded me of what it must have been like in the old days, perhaps at Queen's Park or someplace when they used to play field lacrosse, and the crowd started gathering around, most of them standing watching the game, and it was a perfect setting for that, being a historical place, and so it was just so fitting.
When we come back, the Pee-wee Salmon Bellies head out on their journey across Ontario.
Hi, I'm Shelley. And I'm Courtney. Shelley and I have a whole new exciting season for you with celebrity guests, fishing tips, and cooking segments. Watch Fishing with Shelley and Courtney on Rogers Community Television.
MeTV has captured everyone.
It's science fiction for me.
Even rebels have surrendered.
For me, it's nice family shows.
And now you can join the MeTV family and save money on the TV you love to watch. Just order MeTV before March 1st at our introductory rate. You'll get all 16 new channels and you'll save $24 over a year.
For me, it's comedy.
But this offer is no joke, so call 1-888-ROGERS-1 to get MeTV and save all year.
Are you interested in
Medical issues.
financial issues,
The internet.
community programs,
Services.
what seniors are doing
What senior scene here?
on Rogers Community TV?
Weekday mornings at 9. David Ingram and his guests want to hear from you. Got a beef? Need an answer? Monday through Friday. Ingram on Rogers Community TV.
Epic adventure. Timeless drama.
What's wrong with these people?
And unforgettable faces. Brought to life on film.
I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
The greatest movies of all time. With the biggest stars of all time. The remarkable stories that are history on film. Wednesday through Saturday nights at 8 Eastern, 9 Pacific on History Television.
How do you feel about the tougher driving restrictions or what's happening at BC Ferries? You can let the political decision makers know what you think live Wednesday nights on Voice of the Province on Rogers Community Television.
Their visit to Expo 67 would be brief but memorable, and they soon headed out on their journey across Ontario. They would play in Fergus, Morrisburg, St. Catharines, and Toronto, and would win every game they played. Along the way, they would be billeted with lacrosse families and would make many friends.
Lacrosse is a very rough and tumble game, although we didn't have any injuries. But when the game was over, win or lose, the point is that our boys were billeted with the other kids, so you'd see them around town and they'd wave to you, you know.
For the team, it was fascinating to meet groups of people from other parts of Canada who were also very much into lacrosse. One place they visited still stands out in their minds. It was the Chisholm Lacrosse Stick Factory at the St. Regis Reserve on Cornwall Island.
Don and I were living with Colin Chisholm, who is half owner, along with an Iroquois, who co-owned the lacrosse stick factory. And almost all the sticks in Canada, and certainly in the world, about 90% of them came out of this St. Regis Indian Reserve lacrosse factory. And I think that of the whole trip, that was probably the most exciting thing that the boys went to. They saw the sticks from the trees right through every stage of making the sticks to the finished product, and they each picked out a new stick, and that was wonderful. And some of them had the handles ground down to fit their smaller hands.
Yes, that was another exciting part of the trip. We had never seen how lacrosse stick was made, and they were not making any out west, I don't believe at that time, so it was pretty exciting to see how they bent the wood and you know, netted the netting and everything else.
And I understand you got to choose a stick, and you're a goalie, so
yes.
you chose a slightly different stick than was normal, shall we say?
I chose, I guess it was a field lacrosse defensive stick, which was wide enough for a goalie and yet would allow me to pass the ball quite well. So I chose that and very excited to get it.
Getting a custom-made lacrosse stick was a definite highlight for the boys, and they all hoped their new sticks would come in handy when they faced their eastern rivals, the Oshawa Green Gaels. It was probably the most anticipated match on the trip, one that would be dubbed the Mini Minto. It would be the first unofficial national Pee Wee championship to date. For many of the boys who had watched the junior Green Gaels inevitably win the Minto Cup against the junior team from their hometown, nothing would be better than to win the cup. And that's exactly what they did. Let the celebration begin. Of course, everyone had to have their drink of pop out of the mini Minto Cup.
It was really, really something because growing up in New Westminster by Queen's Park, I always watched, at that time, the Oshawa Green Gaels versus our New Westminster Junior Salmon Bellies, and they usually played for the Minto Cup every second year at Queen's Park, and I watched the games, and that was a real Jim Bishop Oshawa Green Gael dynasty. So for us to beat them in that game was really, really, really something to me, because it showed the kids of the future and that maybe we can win some Man Cups or Minto Cups in New Westminster, which they've done over the years in the last 30 years.
The trip was also an opportunity to visit the local sites. Niagara Falls was on everyone's list. The boys all purchased souvenirs and gifts for family at home and had the opportunity to marvel at one of Canada's natural wonders. Maple Leaf Gardens was also a highlight stop on the trip. Lacrosse players are usually hockey fans as well, and the chance to visit such a Canadian shrine was thrilling.
This was a very special day for the boys, and usually they don't let people in the dressing rooms, but somehow we got special permission, and the boys went into the inner sanctum and sat in the position where all their favorite NHL Maple Leaf stars hung their clothes and their skates and so on. And that was a big day for them.
For over 2.5 weeks, the team lived and breathed lacrosse together. They relied on each other and they shared new experiences with one another as they visited all sorts of different places and met many different people. In the games, they stuck up for one another. Off the floor, they looked out for one another. They were the best of friends, and you can bet that they all look back on the trip as one of the greatest experiences of their lives. What each person remembered about the trip was different. They all had their own highlights.
Well, I see that sea-doos are quite popular now, but I remember a bunch of the guys in Peterborough going on the lake on a fellow who had a sea-doo there, and he was taking turns taking the guys around, and I didn't get to go on the ride, but I was kind of laughing at all the guys who did, and that was kind of fun. But there were all kinds of things. I remember the Upper Canada Village and the locks and swimming in the St. Lawrence River and well, Expo itself, I guess. All different things, but we had a lot of fun. I remember a lot of it.
The last 2 days of the trip took the boys to Peterborough and the city's centennial tournament. It would be a sanctioned provincial tournament in which all areas of Ontario would be represented. Of course, the New West Salmon Bellies would be the lone outsiders, and this would be the team's final opportunity to prove just how good they were.
It was wonderful because the boys got to meet all the kids that they had billeted with over the trip, because all these teams showed up at the tournament, you see. So it was like a big reunion. They had a wonderful time.
How'd the team do against the Ontario competition?
We won just about every game except for the final game in the Cornwall series in overtime by 1 goal, and the final game in the Peterborough tournament in overtime by 1 goal. There was no way. We had goals called back that you wouldn't believe. But we told the boys, look, you're the outsiders. You're not going to win, but you're going to go out there and show them how lacrosse is played, and they did. And at Peterborough, we ended up playing the local Peterborough team. They were the finalists against us. and all the rest of the teams were cheering for us. So there they were, and they were shouting, "Let's go, BC, let's go, BC." And win or lose, our boys were proud, and they did us proud too.
For many of the boys, this tournament provided the most memories. Imagine, if you will, a tournament with teams from all across Ontario and thousands of fans cheering you on. This was all very new for this BC bunch of competitive and talented 11 and 12-year-olds. For some of them, this would be the highlight of their lacrosse careers.
The very final game in New Westminster Salmon Bellies against Peterborough, and it was really hot and thousands of people and a really tight game and a bunch of controversial calls. And doing the presentations after that game, you know, with all the people, it was just the highlight of my minor career, probably.
By 65, as 10-year-olds, they'd forged a new frontier. They'd won the BC finals 2 years straight and become the youngest club to ever win Team of the Year and run their winning streak to 58. Their fame spread to the east, to lacrosse folks in Quebec, where Montreal would stage an exposition. They were asked if they would barnstorm and undertake a trek to play in tournaments and exhibitions. Ontario would host them too, and show them all the sights from Niagara Falls to Hockey's Hall of Fame. But their job was play their best and hopefully ignite an interest in their city and its game. At Oshawa, Jim Bishop would donate a special grail for competition and tradition's sake. There'd be a feature series with the local Pee Wee Gales, and the Mini Minto Cup would be at stake. They played more than 90 BC games without a single loss. That record has endured throughout the years. But mostly, they helped unify Canadian lacrosse, these New Westminster Pee Wee pioneers, for they triggered a tradition that continues to this day. Now minor teams stage nationals each year. They shared a special vision and showed lacrosse the way. These salmon-bellied Pee Wee pioneers.
The tournament final took place on the last day of their trip, and then it was back home to BC to their waiting parents. The boys arrived with their new lacrosse sticks in hand. Most had actually gained weight, and they had a world of memories.
I think it was significant that it was that trip that triggered the real alignment of the playing divisions in minor lacrosse, East and West. The change of the name so that when you talked about midgets or you talked about Pee Wees, East and West, you were now talking about the same playing division. Perhaps the most significant thing that came out of it was the tournaments, East and West. So we made a breakthrough. This had never happened in lacrosse, and it had been a part of baseball, a part of hockey, but it had never happened in lacrosse before we went east, and now teams, from that point on, minor lacrosse teams began traveling east and west and competing.
30 years later, the kids who once wore salmon belly jerseys still have their names on the back of a Bellies jersey. Only this time, it's their sons who are wearing them. A lot of the team members still live in New Westminster. They still keep in touch, and they're still involved in the game, whether it's as a coach, or a referee, or a player. Lacrosse is in their blood.
Yes, there's still 2 or 3 of us that live in New Westminster that have kids playing minor lacrosse and minor sports in New West, and all of us are coaching our sons.
We've got 2 boys that are, so I sort of sometimes coach the one fella the one year and then the one the next year. And this year we coached another guy down the street, John Davies, who used to play, who's younger than I am. And we had a real good season. We had a novice B team, and we had a real good season with them this year. We won more games than we lost, but the kids learned something, and that was the main thing. They passed the ball around, moved the ball, and we really had a good season.
Mark Benson will always live lacrosse. Besides bringing back great memories, he knows that he's helping the sport to grow. He loves being around the energy and the emotion of lacrosse. We wondered if his children were planning to play the game as well.
No, I have 2 daughters, and but as referee-in-chief of New Westminster Minor Lacrosse, I'm in charge of 50 referees, and I'd say half of them are probably 12 or 14 and under, so I'm in charge of a lot of youngsters that are involved in lacrosse at both play and referee.
Although neither of Mark's daughters play lacrosse, you can tell that they love watching the old footage of their father playing the game when he was a peewee. Of course, watching their grandparents and the rest of the team 30 years ago is quite a laugh for the rest of the family as well. For Eric and Marion Hughes, it's a trip they'll never forget.
The boys did so many things together. They played hockey together, they played soccer together, if they went in the summertime up to the playground at the high school, they'd play football and as a team. And they hadn't before, but that was all right. They could win anyhow because they knew what the other person on the team were. They were like one family.
The whole trip was so active and so well organized that I can still remember going into one or 2 of the little towns and not knowing which ones they are offhand, but really surprised to look at the crowd lined on the main street, and the kids were put onto little cars, etc., and taken down the street, and everybody's cheering, and I was overwhelmed. I had no idea such things were going to happen.
Watching the footage 30 years later would certainly stir emotions in those who were part of it. One of the boys has passed away. Some have moved, while some still see each other every day. Life is much different for all. Now in their 40s, they'll never be able to relive their childhood, but you can be certain that their memories will never fade.
I think it's most gratifying that so many of the boys stayed with lacrosse. They went on to, a surprising number of them went on to play junior and senior lacrosse. And more than that, many of them are refereeing or coaching today. And so we've formed a kind of, it's a sort of a legacy, and we've gone a full cycle. And now they're the coaches, and their kids are playing, and I think that's a very important aspect of the trip.
This trip in 1967 showed the importance of grassroots interest and community dedication to the game of lacrosse. It was a trip that showed how close we all are, right across Canada. The people of Ontario welcomed our children into their homes, and they all learned something. The game was unified, and some bonds strengthened east and west. It was a trip that did leave a legacy for lacrosse, not just a legacy in terms of rules and leagues, but with the individuals who are now the coaches and mentors to yet another generation of young athletes. In 1967, this series across Ontario and Quebec highlighted the rich heritage that is this great game. Today, in most communities of British Columbia, you will find lacrosse being played, and we encourage you to get out and support minor lacrosse. That is, after all, where it all begins. Maybe even if you're involved with a team, plan a trip. You never know. With a little effort and dedication, anything is possible. I'm Archie Miller. Thank you very much for watching.